and sometimes that means radical change for things. It doesn't mean doing things the same. It's really hard because organisations exist in our sector out of passion, because people have seen a gap and a need and they set something up to do it, and it's quite hard to change that. But needs change and ways of delivery change. So I'm quite passionate about things like mergers and partnerships, because I think they're actually about putting beneficiaries at the heart of things and being willing to accept that what you do and the way you do it isn't the only answer. And I do think we have too many charities. Not always a popular opinion, but I do believe that, not because they're ever set up in bad faith, but they often replicate things, and we waste resource, and we're all competing for the same resources, and making sure they go to the right places is really important. So that's a bit about why I'm passionate about it, really. So what I'm going to do today is talk about sort of three elements, really. The making the decision to merge. How do you get to that point where you're thinking about that might be an answer for you? What is then the process of finding a merger partner? Because that was definitely the most terrifying bit for me, when the chair of trustees said, well, I think we've got to that point where you need to look for a partner. And I thought, well, how do I do that? Where do I even start? And I thought, do I tell him I don't know how to do that? Or I meant to like pretend that I really know everything that's going on. And for me, the other element was about control and communications. Actually, that's a really critical part of making this successful. But given that we're a small group, I thought it might be quite nice just to start with some introductions. Be really useful to know who you are, what your background is, you know, what organisation do you come from, and really your experience of charity mergers. Have you been involved, or is this a completely new subject for you? So I'm going to pick from my bottom right-hand corner, which is Darren, and ask him to go first. And Darren, when you've finished, can you nominate the next person to go, please?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So my name's Darren Taylor from two organisations. We've got Eco Community CIC, and which is a community interest company. And we've also got Eco Learning Limited, which is a charity. So over the years, we've been operating as two different organisations, and we now feel it's time to merge the two organisations into one, because there's no point. We've got two sets of accounts we're kind of duplicating some work as well, and so it's come to that time. I have no idea about mergers. I've never done it before, but it is definitely time now, and so that's me. And I'll hand over to Susan Ryder.
Hi, I'm Susan Ryder. I'm a trustee at Rushy Green Time Bank. I've run my own small enterprises, usually around digital inclusion. And right now I'm doing things around health and women's health in particular. And yeah, I've never really been involved in charity mergers, really. Apart from, you know, that we took in PCL and stuff like that, but nothing bigger than that.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. Who do you want to go next, Susan? You're on mute.
Sorry, Ron.
Thank you, Suzanne. My name is Ron Bourne. I'm the Voluntary Sector Development Lead at Lewisham Local. I will hand over to Philippe.
Yeah, most people know me, I think. I'm Philippe. I run the Rushy Green Time Bank, Lewisham Local. I think that's, for me, it's about, I mean, never done a merger, of course, but we've done one acquisition, but it's more about, we know it's been knocking on our door every now and again, and because I'm so aware of the funding climate, that the possibility of merging will again knock at the door. It's very likely. I could see us merging at some point. Maybe not. Maybe yes. But it's there in the background. So I just want to get my head around a little bit. I know the advantages, but I've also read some really negative stuff about merging a couple of weeks ago, and I think through Third Sector or something like this. But we do know that it's a way to go for lots of things. So, yeah.
Thanks, Philippe. Who are you nominating, Philippe?
Leo?
Thanks, Philip. I've been wondering who's going to be bold to pronounce that name.
Oh,
So well done, Philip. Well done. My name is Lyle. I'm the lead of a registered faith group in Lewisham, really. But the reason why I'm here is because I've just been recently, I'm just recently a co-op trustee member of Lewisham Church's Care, and they've just, they have two registered charities that they've merged. And so I just feel that as a member now, it's for me, so I've come here really to get tips really as to the benefits of, two charity organizations merging, the benefits for organizations. So I can know how I can support them really, because it's quite new. It's a new journey for them. So, and then maybe, for my faith group as well, in other areas that we provide support for, like Rebecca, you said that is true. We provide almost the same thing, most charity organizations, and we source out the fund from almost the same place, really. So for me, it's a learning curve, really. I just want to take in as much as I can so I can go back to the board of trustees, both for my faith group and where I am outside, to see what I can do really to support them.
Thanks, Leo. Louise, that leaves you.
And Sam, I think. Yes, I'm Louise Alexander. I'm a freelance finance manager, management accountant, interim FD, that sort of thing. I work with setting charities up on Xero and QuickBooks, other online platforms. And basically, I work with charities that are too small to have a permanent, especially full-time finance person in post. And so that might be, a day a week or a day a month, doing top level stuff. It might be supporting people like Philippe to do to work on QuickBooks, or so that's basically what I'm doing. And Lewisham Local's been a great way for me of making local connections. I don't have any experience in mergers, and that's partly why I'm here. I couldn't agree with you more, Rebecca, about that there are too many charities, and when you look at just how many there are, just how many boards of trustees that means, and how much additional administrative work. I'm a great fan of charities closing down when they need to, rather than just carrying on for the sake of keeping it alive. And I think this is also another way to go of pooling resources and projects and that sort of thing. So yeah, I just came because I'm curious, and I know a little bit about Age Exchange. I did a project on them when I was doing my arts management and accounting degree in crikey late 90s. So yeah, I was really curious to see how the organisation progressed.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. So that's really helpful. I think a couple of you brought up the issues of duplication of work, like Darren, you're saying, well, actually, you've got two organisations, you've got two sets of accounts, even small things can make a difference. For us, like a really little thing in the merger is we merge with a really big organisation. My insurance, my buildings insurance now just gets subsumed into theirs. That's £4,000 a year that I'm not spending on buildings insurance anymore. So sometimes it's a little bit. So I'm going to tell you our story about merger. Ours is quite a happy story, but I know that there are, mergers that don't go as well. But I'm just going to tell you what it sort of meant for us and the process that we went through as well. So I'm just going to try and share my screen. Okay, can everybody see? Yep. So a couple of other things. One, I'd say, obviously confidentiality is important. What I'm saying you can repeat. I'm very open and honest about the journey we went through at Age Exchange, and I've written some articles about it. If you want to give examples of, your own experience, it can be quite a sensitive subject. So I guess, what I'm saying is respect each other's privacy, because people may not want people to know things that they're planning for their organisations. I think we're small enough that if you've got a question, stick your hand up either through the little symbol that you can get in the box, or unmute yourself and interrupt me. I don't think that would be too disruptive. So, so yeah, I'm talking about, as I said, three things: sort of making a strategic decision, the actual process of finding the partner and getting to your legal position of merger, and then also managing the communication. So that's kind of how I've split my presentation up for today. In terms of age exchange has existed since 1985, and our expertise is in reminiscence. And you can see here a classic bit of reminiscence theatre going on. There's nothing like putting a pair of bicycle handlebars into somebody's hands and getting a story out of them about their childhood or their teenage years. And if ever you get a chance, try this, because it's amazing the power of something like that. And Age Exchange traditionally was Age Exchange Theatre Trust, known for reminiscence theatre and intergenerational theatre. But, you know, even without merger, things had changed, and we had moved quite a lot through sort of from 2010 onwards into working more with people with dementia and their family carers. And that is really our specialism now, and the mainstay during the pandemic of what we've been doing through a virtual daycare service supporting people at home, still based around the creative arts and the use of reminiscence. And we combine those two things through an independent evaluated model that shows the impact on people with dementia. So we had moved more into that field because we had good evidence of impact. It made sense in terms of a beneficiary group for whom there was a big difference to be made in terms of what we did, and that helped with stability in terms of funding. But also we have a community hub, and some of you have been to the place in Blackheath, which is now a library and a cafe. It has activities for older people and is a real heart of the community, a footfall of 180,000 a year through the front door in a normal year. But of course, that doesn't really make much money. It doesn't stand on its own. You're running a library for free for the council. You have a contract, but no money changes hands. But, you know, you've got a building, you've got to sustain and cleaning and all of those things. So there were challenges. But when I talk about making a strategic decision, this is a burning platform, for want of a better picture to find. A lot of people come to merger when it's too late, in my view. So the place is already on fire and you've got 6 months to find a solution before you have to close, and you're worried about your beneficiaries. I think that is, you've got a problem right from that moment, because you're clinging at decisions. And we went through a very different process at Age Exchange. So I had secured some funding through a government grant called the Local Sustainability Fund back in 2017, I think it was 2016, 2017, which was an opportunity to actually take a really good look at the organisation. So somebody waiting to come in, let me just admit that. So in that, I actually managed to get just over £90,000. We were doing a whole review of the organisation from what our sort of mission, values and goals were, through to developing a theory of change and a new measurement framework and a legacy fundraising strategy as well. So I was able to get in some expertise to help. But what it meant was quite a lot of time with trustees thinking about what was the organisation like, what could it really achieve, what were the challenges. And that meant the trustees came to their own decision. Through that process, I think they came to a conclusion about a couple of things. One, they still felt very strongly that the organisation had a huge impact to make, and its methodology of working with people with dementia was proven to work, and they could see the evidence of that. So why wouldn't you want to do more of it? That was the conclusion they drew from that. Why do you want to stay small and only benefit, you know, a small number of people when actually you've got something that could do more? But also that the financial model wasn't sustainable, and sooner or later that there was going to be problems. There were two bits of the organisation. There was the reminiscence arts, community outreach and dementia work, which through grants and that probably sustained itself. But when you added in the community hub, it didn't really. And that was going to be long-term problem. it wasn't a problem that year or probably the next year, but perhaps in year 3 or 4 it would have been. And I can definitely say we would not have survived the pandemic without having merged. I think the last year would have been awful, to be honest. But, you know, knowing that you've got some of that stability in the background has made life a lot easier, and I've probably slept a little bit better than I would have done if, you know, if I'd thought we were on our own. So trustees were with us right from the start of that. They came to that conclusion, and it was then that the chair of trustees, Kumar Jacob, who's a really, really good businessman, and I have to say was an amazing support and guide through this. He only lives the next street to me, so one morning he'd picked me up to drive into Age Exchange, and it was on the car journey in, he said to me, I think you need to start looking for a partner so that we can progress with this, when I had my minor panic. So that was really the turning point, I think. And we did some more work with trustees at that point. So we said, well, if we're going to merge and we got a facilitator in, what are all the things we want to keep about Age Exchange? What are the things that we really value and we just wouldn't let a grip of, those things? What are we willing to let go? And that included things like accepting, actually, we might have to let the name and the brand go. Much as we knew we had a lot of recognition as a name, the trustees accepted that was the thing that we loved, but it didn't necessarily have to be the thing that stayed. That wasn't the thing that made the difference to beneficiaries. And then we drew up a list of the values we thought the partner organisation had to have as well, that would make us think that we could work with them and merge with them. So we had done a bit of background work. So then we actually enlisted help. When I had my, how am I going to do this? I remembered that I had been to a workshop the year before by an organisation called Eastside Prime Timers, a lunchtime sort of round table about merger. So I got in touch with them. And I spoke to trustees and said, actually, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to spend some money if we're going to do this properly, because I don't really know where to start. So I went to them and I contracted them to help us with a search for finding somebody. Actually, I'm going to go back. So what did that involve? We talked to them about the organisation. They came and visited us. We gave them our lists. These are values we're looking for. This is what we want to keep. This is what we think is great about us. And they went off and did a search and came back to us and said, we think these 40 organisations might be some people that you should approach about merger. And they looked nationally. We came from the view that small and local, another small local charity would probably be suitable for us, but they came back with a sort of national search. And we whittled that down to 20 organisations. We went through it and said, we don't think those ones are right for us, you know, all sorts of reasons. And they wrote to the 20 to say we were looking, you know, a bit about us, and we were looking, would they be interested in having a discussion? And we ended up meeting 5 separate organisations as a result of that search. They all came to us at Age Exchange to meet. I'm told normally you meet off-site. That's more common. But what we were told, yeah, sorry, Louise.
Yeah, can I just ask a question? When the people who were helping you, were they specialists or were they just somebody who'd done it before?
They're specialists, I suppose. They've got quite a bit of experience, yeah. And they've also, Eastside, they do a range of things. So they've also got researchers. So their research team would go through and trawl looking for the organisations that might be suitable. But Eastside Pride Timers produce a sort of state of the nation merger report every year. So worth going to their website and having a look. So they'll tell you how many mergers have taken place every year, what sort of organisations. And I think it only averages sort of between 60 and 80 a year across the UK. They advised us to meet on site because their view was that the Age Exchange hub was such a fantastic place. It sold itself, and if people came, they would love it. And in fact, that was something they said to us all along. be really proud of what you do. Because you're thinking you need a merger isn't a reason to undersell yourself. Remember that actually you do great things, and you've got to sell that to people. You've got to talk about your strengths, not your weaknesses. You have got to tell them a story, but in a sense, you're like, what are they buying? I mean, we tend to use the term merger in the charity sector for, you know, description for everything. Philip mentioned acquisition earlier. We don't use that very often in the charity sector, even when it's true that that's what it is, or it's a takeover. We go, oh, merger, as the answer to everything. So that I had to keep being reminded of that in those, before those meetings. You know, the guy from Eastside would say to me, Rebecca, remember, you've got a great thing here. And because we were lucky, we own 2 buildings in Blackheath. So in a sense, what could be the downside for a charity partner if it all goes wrong? They then own 2 properties in Blackheath. You know, you've got to remember there's some business bits behind this as well. They were getting 2 properties to put on the bottom line. That's not the same for everybody, but you know, you may have other assets that are really important. And I would say the third thing for me in finding the partner was about being willing to be challenged on your perceptions. So we really thought that small and local was going to be the answer for us. Of the 5 organisations we saw, 3 were small and local, 2 were large national, and it became really apparent in those meetings that small and local only doubled the problems, it didn't solve them. And in fact, it came down to the 2 large national ones were the ones that were interested in the 2 that we had made a choice between which we wanted to merge with. And I would say the final thing in finding a partner is keep your beneficiaries at the heart of the decision that you are making. This is not about me as the chief executive. It's not about the trustees. It's about the people that receive your service. And you have to pull yourself up about that. So when you're feeling like, oh, I don't want that bit to change, we would lose that. Why don't you want it to change? Is it because it's something you hold dear and you love about the organisation, or is it something that beneficiaries hold dear and love about the organisation, I would say. We found a really large charity partner. So we merged with an organisation called Community Integrated Care. They're a large social care provider. They have a turnover of over 130 million a year, and we're somewhere between 500 and 700,000. So we are a drop in the ocean for them financially. Just admitting somebody else. But what we did was find how we complemented each other. And I think this is what's quite different about our merger to some. If we had been another social care provider merging with them, of course, our name would have gone and everything would have merged because we'd have been doing exactly the same thing that they were doing. But what we found was that we had a connection because they ran some older people's care homes and some specialism around dementia, which we had. So we had a connection. They felt whilst they were a registered charity, they were more of a business because they're basically operating under contract for all of their services. And they wanted a community-facing charitable arm of the organisation that had a connection through dementia, but actually did different things for them, and that our expertise would bring something to their organisation. So we were much better fundraisers than they were. We had all this experience of working with volunteers, and we had a national name in a very different way to them. So we had complementary things. So you don't need to find someone that's exactly the same as you. You don't need to be doing the same things. I think that was a lesson for us as well. So we were able to see how we might complement each other in that way. And that's, I think, been a bonus for us because we haven't been competing about things like that. So we merged in July 2018. We, partially because of the pandemic, because last year was going to be the big year on integration, we haven't integrated all of our systems yet. So we operate as we're still a registered charity, a separate registered charity, Age Exchange, with our own board of trustees, a much smaller board, just 3 people. But we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Community Integrated Care. So technically, in a governance sense, they could sack all of the trustees of Age Exchange if they wanted to, and and change them, because actually they're the owners of the charity. We work really collaboratively. It doesn't work like that. I'm not saying it couldn't ever. And we had a merger agreement. So you tie up the relationship in an agreement, and our agreement lasted 2 years. So you're still merged beyond that. We're still a wholly owned subsidiary, but that agreement makes promises for the, in our case, for 2 years. So in that 2 years, it was no change of names, no end of employment for people apart from where they already had a fixed term contract due to a grant. Do you know what I mean? That was different. So those sorts of things, no sale of buildings, no change of services apart from where grants ended. And it was for 2 years, and that to me felt reasonable, because I can't promise anything 2 years out anyway. And lo and behold, the end of the 2 years was in the middle of a pandemic. So, you know, none of us could have foreseen what that would look like. So we still have a long way to go in terms of integrated systems. What we're focusing on with them at the moment is trying to tie up services a bit better. So the predominant work for community integrated care is in learning support for people with learning disabilities, autism and mental health, and a small portfolio around older people and dementia. So we're using the next couple of years as an opportunity to expand who we work with, and using their expertise of working with people with learning disabilities and how our methodology can be used in that field as well. So I'm just finishing a paper for their trustees, in fact, about how we can do that over the next couple of years. So it brings some opportunities for us. The reason I talked quite a lot about trustees being brought in from the beginning of this process and how that worked for us was really for this. I'm told by Eastside Primetimers there are two main reasons for charity mergers failing. And when I say failing, I mean for them not going ahead, that you get to nearly there with somebody, but it all falls apart. The first one is pensions, that actually the pension liability is too large for another charity to want to take on. You can know that well in advance what your pension liability is. So if you're starting on this journey, it's something you can look at. And the other is that trustees change their mind. They don't sign off on the final agreement. So those are the two biggest reasons. So that's why I talked about our process, because I didn't have that problem with trustees. And the way we managed that was because they were involved in that original process of saying, we think we need a partner. What we then did, once we started working with Eastside Primetimers and looking at this shortlist and those sorts of things, was to actually get a small group of 3 of them to be on the inside of that track and to work as a subgroup on finding the partner. And in fact, we chose one of the most difficult people, I can describe them like that, people who are sort of more likely to be challenging and opposed to it, to be on that subgroup, because it meant they owned the decision when we went back to board, and they were part of presenting it as a positive thing, and all their challenging had been done in the early stages of the process rather than at the last moment. So that, I mean, those are just things to remember that that's kind of most often why it goes wrong. I'm going to talk a bit about communications next, because obviously this is a big decision, isn't it? And lots of people might have an interest. I mean, Louise already talked about, oh, I'd done some work about age exchange in the late 90s. You know, we found that so many people have a connection to age exchange because they came on an intergenerational school project in the 80s and 90s. You know, we have people come in with their kids, go, oh, I came here when I was at school. And, you know, so there's a lot of investment. But I'll stop sharing for the moment and just see if there's any questions so far before I start to talk about communications.
Hi. Go on.
Sam.
All right, go on then. Thank you. I may have missed it, sorry, but what were the key reasons, I guess, for the chair to initially say that to you? What position, yeah, were you in that he felt that you really needed to merge?
We had, when I arrived at Age Exchange in 2014, there was literally 10 weeks of cash left in the bank. to pay things. So I'd arrived at a bit of a crisis point, but I arrived at the same time 2 weeks after a new finance manager. So that hadn't been clear up until that point. Perhaps if it had been clear, I might not have taken the job. I don't know. And it had been masked a bit by the previous chair. I mean, very generously, at 2 years running, he had put £100,000 into the organisation at the end of the year to cover deficits. So some of it was not clear. And whilst we weren't making those losses, we were still making losses every year, and it was diminishing each year because we were improving things. The cafe was starting to make a surplus. We were maximising space rental and that. If you modelled it out, there wasn't really a way to make it work. We struggle, like a lot of organisations our size. You're neither so small that you don't spend so much money, but you're not big enough to have capacity for growth. A lot of the time, you know, everybody is working at capacity, so new projects are not that easy. So it was we won't be able to carry on like this. Whilst we're sort of managing each year, sooner or later this is going to be a crisis. And we tried modelling all different things. Could we make the community hub into a community interest company and run that slightly separately, you know, and make that wash its face on its own? Run this bit just as a charity. You know, we kind of modelled all those things out. We had somebody come in and look at we have offices that we rent out on top of the community hub at Age Exchange. It's a separate door. It's almost like another building. We modelled that into doing it as Airbnb, turning it into rooms. We modelled turning it into flats and selling it off. Do you know what I mean? We did all of those, and none of them were long-term fixes. I think they, you know, like if you sell off a bit of the building, it gives you some money for a while, but it doesn't, unless you're able to invest it in a way that actually brings out the result, it doesn't work. Yes, I think that's what I'm at. Leo, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Rebecca. In terms of making a strategic decision, you did say that it's quite important to get the evidence that one's charity is making in terms of the difference you're making. I just want to know what Age Exchange, how did they collate that? Did you have to go through a survey, a questionnaire, or you had to rely on words of mouth? How did you present that to the organizations you were trying to merge with?
Right, so we had, lucky enough, we had run a project funded through the Guy's and St Thomas's Trust, which finished in 2015, which was a research project on our what's called Radical, which is our method of working with people with dementia. And, Royal Holloway, part of the University of London, had independently evaluated that. So we knew we had academic evidence of impact. Accompanied with that, we had data. So there's a people counter on the front door. So we know how many people come in and out of the building every day. We know how many people attend classes, those sorts of things. So we had all of those sorts of things, but we did do a document for potential partners. So those 20 that we wrote to, they got a brief about the organisation and all of those things, which included, you know, quotes from people about how they felt about the organisation, background on where funding came from, that sort of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we go on? Darren.
Yeah. So the charity, the other charity that you merged with, owns you for the last 2 years. Is the aim to put that into one, or are you going to keep it as it is at the moment?
We're just having that discussion at the moment, Darren. I think it's a really difficult one. It's quite nice. It's nice to trot along, still having your own board of trustees. I mean, I don't get bothered that much by the parent charity. You know, on a day-to-day basis, I'm going along and doing what I want. But there is people, like now, for example, if I've sadly had to make 3 people redundant over the last couple of weeks. I used to have to be the expert in everything. I can just ring their HR team now, and they provide me with all of the standard letters and the advice. And, you know, somebody rang me yesterday and said, are you dealing with IR35 yet? You know, the new inland revenue stuff about self-employment. Like, there's somebody there to do that. So I've got the benefit of that, but I still get to be Age Exchange and all of that. But we're discussing it at the moment because it's too easy to sit comfortably with that. And in some ways, there's more security with fully merging, but keeping Age Exchange as a brand, because it does do away with separate accounts and things. You know, so it's difficult because also there may be some funds you can't apply for. I think on balance, I'm thinking we should go for full integration. I've just written a paper about that for their board. I also think it makes their trustees take more responsibility for us. In a sense, we sat quite separately. And in the last few months, there's been a bit of like, oh God, right, what's happening with Age Exchange? I'm starting to ask some questions that they feel things are out of control for them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. None of my trustees feel that strongly about it. They can see the benefits on either side. So they're open to the idea of full merger, but I think they'd feel a little bit sad about it, but nobody's saying we definitely shouldn't do this.
Yes.
Can I ask a follow-on to that one?
Yeah.
I think I put this beforehand. How does it affect your back office costs? I mean, are you still pretty much running the same stuff apart from insurance, or are you actually able to get the bigger charity to do the books and all of those sorts of other things, provide IT support, you know, the things that aren't individual, because obviously that for me is the potential cost saver, is that you don't necessarily run your back office, you're just a front facing thing.
Yeah. We are at the moment, but that is part of the integration plan that we have. So we've done bits. So yeah, little things like insurance, contracts. So like the lift contract, maintenance contract is now with, we've got 2 lifts. That's now with them rather than us managing separately, and they can get a better deal. IT, we are halfway through. So we're sort of on their system, but we still pay for some local support just for if we need people physically to come in, but they do the other bits. And finance systems, for the coming year to go onto we're on QuickBooks, they're on something else, I can't remember, but that is the plan for this year. So yeah, there are more savings to be made, but some of it is the investment you get as well. So we've been looking to expand geographically, and we've been doing quite a bit of work trying to lay some groundwork in Kent around some dementia work, and in fact the charity partners employed somebody to do some of that work. So it's sort of not been my cost, but there's been some extra resource doing that research. So, you know, it's some of those things that you're not paying for anymore. Shall I carry on with some communications?
Yeah. Well,
let me get to my share.
Any other questions, I can follow up in the chat.
Yeah. Where am I? Right. So I think the biggest issue is with something like this is how stories get distorted and what people think is going to happen rather than the reality, and sessions that you could just come along to and ask questions as well. And in fact, I don't think we had more than about 6 people at any of those Q&As. On the whole, people were fairly happy with it. We only had one person that was a problem, not direct to us, but there's a thing called Nextdoor, a social media site called Nextdoor, and there were some very critical comments on there from one person about, oh, you know, this is sort of typical Age Exchange is going, they've sold themselves to a big company, blah, blah. This is somebody who I know is a serial complainer to the council and refuses to put a foot inside our front door because she doesn't think the library should be run by a community organisation. So I did, you know, obviously go on and challenge it and put the facts there, but I didn't have a single other complaint, either from a member of staff, a volunteer, a beneficiary. We had a lot of questions, but more of, are we still going to be meeting on a Monday? Can I still volunteer on a Friday? So all of that reassurance we could give. Still going to be Age Exchange. Nothing is changing in Blackheath was our message to people. Everything here is the same. And our merger partners, sorry, I forgot this, they sent somebody to all of those Q&A sessions as well. So there was one of their senior managers there to answer questions. We wrote to the key funders, to our big funders. We wrote to them and we offered them a telephone conversation as well. And most of them took that up and it gave us a chance to explain. And I would say pretty much, it was 100% of funders were actually really pleased. It felt like we were doing something to take control of the situation, that we were looking at being sustainable, and it was a strength rather than a weakness to be merging. And I don't think there are any, in a sense, I suppose, because we stayed as a separate registered charity. I do on grant applications get questions about the complexity of the governance structure, but I've not had anything turned down because people are dissatisfied. And in fact, in the last year, the reason I say I don't think we would be here without it, on quite a few of the grants over the last year, there have been questions about stability, and I have a commitment letter from the partner charity to say that they will underwrite losses over the next 12 months if there's problems. So that reassurance that grant funders often want, that you're not going to go bankrupt in the next 12 months and the money they give you isn't going to be used, has been there this year. So this is us at our merger launch. You can actually use the merger as a way of, you know, a really positive promotion. We've got Damien and Mayor Janet, the Member of Parliament, there as well. A guy called Roy, and I've suddenly forgotten his name, who runs an organisation called the Academy of Fab Stuff, which is sort of innovation within the National Health Service, and the Women's from the National Care Forum. So it was a chance actually to make some links with some other people as well, so you can sell that, and people who haven't seen your work suddenly get an opportunity to see that. I don't think merger is about failure, and I think that's one of the problems. That's kind of what people associate with it. Oh, I haven't managed to, you know, as a chief exec, I haven't managed to get my organisation to a place without relying on somebody else. I think if you believe in what you do and you love what you do, your job is to get others to believe and love it as well. And the merger is a result of that, because people want to see more of it happen. They want to be part of it. And I think that's what the merger story has been for us at Age Exchange. I accept that mergers come in very, very different forms, and some of them are much more like sort of hostile takeovers, and you might lose your name, etc. But if that group that was meeting on a Monday, which was a weekly lifeline for people, still meets on a Monday and they still get that weekly lifeline, that's a success story rather than it not happening at all. So that's our story at Age Exchange. Again, I'll take questions if anybody's got them, rather than me continuing to talk. I realise it's quite a lot of talking.
Any other questions?
The legals.
Oh,
Yeah.
Who did you get your legals? Did you kind of do it yourselves because you thought we can actually do this by going through all the memorandums and articles and legal, or did you get a law firm in to do that?
We did pay a law firm for some of it. I have to say I haven't touched on that. You're right to raise that, Darren. So my experience of the merger at the NSPCC and the process is completely different to the merger at Age Exchange. When you had the NSPCC and something as large as Childline, the due diligence process, I think Darren's just, oh no, you're still there. Sorry, everybody moved. You know, when you lose where people are on Zoom. The due diligence process was huge. We worked with, I think it was Waterhouse there, and I can remember it was, because it was secret, every Friday night you'd be there till about 9 o'clock at night working with them because they were doing it pro bono, and everything had to be, you know, when you're doing due diligence, you've got to go through every document, every lease, employment contracts, all of those things. For us, it was a much lighter due diligence process this way round. You know, obviously they wanted to go through, we still had to provide a lot to them in terms of employment contracts, ownership of buildings, etc. like that. But on our side, a lot of our due diligence was done through the actual process of choosing the partner, you know, and the values part was more important. But yes, we did then employ some lawyers, because you've got to make sure that your merger agreement is right. And obviously there's work to be done with the Charity Commission. You do have to register them as a, I think it's called a significant person of interest with Companies House as well. It wasn't too onerous, which is completely different from the NSPCC Childline part as well, because they were big enough to make a material difference to the organisation had there been a lot of liabilities on their books that we didn't know about, and that's the difference, really. But I believe Cranfield Business School, oh yeah, I could give you an interesting experience of the merger of Childline with Esther Ransom as well, Sam. I believe the Cranfield Business School do provide pro bono help around mergers and some finance as well. We didn't discover that till too late in the process, but they will help front end some of that. So I would approach them if you're thinking about it. Yeah, I'm sure Esther has a very different take on the merger between Childline and the NSPCC. I mean, technically it wasn't a merger. Childline were going bankrupt and they came to the NSPCC to bail them out. And on the first go of asking, the NSPCC said no, and a few months passed, and then they came back and basically said, if you don't do this, we will go to the press and say you've abandoned children and you've let them down because we're about to go bankrupt. So at that point, people felt there wasn't any other choice. I mean, I think they wanted to the first time, the terms weren't just right. Definitely. So yeah, so I mean, in many ways, it was a takeover rather than a merger. That's my point about the language we use in the sector, I suppose, you know. But people tried to treat it as a merger because it felt like it was a better way for things to work out in the long term. And the laws changed since then, so it was quite complicated then. If you merged, you couldn't, let's say people had legacies that they would put in their wills and were leaving to Childline, you couldn't hand them over to the NSPCC automatically. Then there is a mergers register now. Then what you had to do was keep the smaller companies, so you had to keep Childline registered as a charity with the trustees, and once a year they had to meet to agree to hand over those funds to the NSPCC, whereas the Register of Mergers, I think, enables that just to happen automatically now.
Hello, Rebecca. Sorry, I came to this a bit late.
No, no worries.
I'm Jonathan Prince, pretending to be my wife today. I want the question I have is, sometimes my experience is the hardest things to merge are the trustees. What's your experience of the trustees and the chairs and all of that merging, please?
Yeah, so we, you may have missed my bit at the beginning that we had trustees with us all the way along for this. They were part of a strategic review and came to this conclusion themselves. So that happened. I had a very astute chair who, he's the best chair you could ever have, I would say, in the charity sector. And he had one-to-ones with everybody and secured from them a commitment to resign as trustee if the merger happened and they needed to. He did this about 8 months in advance, I think, of that happening. So he'd sort of had those discussions with people. And when we came to it, we agreed there would be just one age exchange trustee on the CIC board. I think that was reasonable given the different sizes. And we asked who was interested. Three people were, and Community Integrated Care interviewed the 3 people and chose one of them. And actually one of the councillor, Amanda de Rijk from Lewisham Council, was one of my trustees and remains one of the Community Integrated Care trustees as well. So we still sort of have a link in that way.
Thank you.
Darren?
Yeah, you mentioned CIC then. So what is the structure? Is the bigger company a CIC? Because you said they were trading and then they own the charity.
Yeah, sorry, I've confused things. Their name is Community Integrated Care, so their abbreviation is CIC. So,
okay, cool.
They're a registered charity and a company limited by guarantee.
Yes, that's the interesting thing I've got to look at is who's going to own who. So I've got a CIC and a charity.
Yeah, yeah, and I can see your point about. I know a lot of charities set up CICs because it allows a different trading arm and things like that. But when you're quite small, you've got double the amount of work, haven't you? And you get
well, that's what it is. We've got the CIC, which is actually the bigger company with all the infrastructure. The charity is smaller, and that's the issue we've got. So do we have the charity actually own the CIC, or is it the other way around? And that's what I've got to try and work out. Or do we just merge it into one company? And that's the headache I've got at the moment.
because you could go with this CIC being the trading subsidiary, even if it was bigger, even if it was the bigger one, you know, because then you've still got the ability to trade. You know, so you've got those two different. Oh, interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
Rebecca, my own experience with really teeny tiny charities is such that I feel I should be advocating for them in this particular, in the context of mergers, and a lot of application, a lot of duplication happens here. In your experience, I know you're not a teeny tiny charity, but in your experience, what should the approach be of a marginal charity that has done a project, maybe successfully or otherwise, and after the project is complete, look to ally themselves or merge or collaborate with another similar organization? What do you think their approach should be, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something about deciding about the core impact you want to have, isn't it? We're a bit sort of hung up on structure and existence through an organization rather than our ability to deliver something, and having a really long, hard look about what is the essence of us, what is the difference. I think when our trustees discussed it, they felt there was still enough that Age Exchange did that was significantly different from other people to warrant it being, you know, it's still existing in some way and finding that work. So it wasn't that that work was all being done and we could have just handed over beneficiaries to something. So I think there's something about that. And I do, in this whole sphere, I think there's a failure of larger charities to provide those opportunities for people, you know, that, and I give the example of, you know, a lot of people charities get set up when somebody loses a loved one, especially if that's a child, and they want to do something in their memory. And I can completely understand people's need to do that in the grieving process and the desire for them to have had an impact on the world. But I think large charities have failed to enable people to do that through things that already exist. You know, like when you've got people like Cancer Research or Macmillan or whoever it is, how have we not found something that enables a family to do that, that doesn't make it feel like it's just lost within that brand, Macmillan, whoever it is, but they get some recognition for the period that they need it? Because inevitably, not inevitably, but what tends to happen is 10 or 12 years later, of course, hopefully the family has moved on a bit, and won't be entirely, and then the interest in a charity wanes, perhaps not from them, but all their friends who supported it and gave lots of money to it as part of that whole thing. It becomes more difficult and then it sort of gets lost. So I think there's a lot for the sector to think about how do we actually help people to find the impact they want to have without them setting up something separate. And I mean, I think I've heard Philippe talk about this in a sort of slightly different context before, but, you know, about how you help communities drive things for themselves, but it doesn't need to be a new charity. Do you know what I mean? What help communities do things that they want to, and how do we all help them do things that they want to, perhaps through mechanisms that already exist?
Yeah, and many of the groups that get set up, the community champions that set them up are actually refugees from some of these other organizations that they don't feel have been inclusive of their own issues. So they set up their own project to deal with it. Yeah, and I think you know, the work of people like Charities So White, where they're actually pointing this out, is right. You know, of course, people will set up their own thing if you don't reflect them, and that's not a bad thing. Perhaps, you know, our problem is we've got lots of charities that are the same, lots of charities that are different, and that bit of growth might be entirely the right sort of growth. Yeah, it's not that there shouldn't be new things. Louise?
And I just I had a fairly high profile mum who passed away last year, and we've been dealing with exactly that sort of thing. You know, people want to do something to remember her, and it was ironic because she'd set up two charities, you know, a charity and a what would have been a CIC if they'd been happening at the time, and neither of them were right. And in the end, what we did was we found a charity to host a restricted fund for us. Because I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was to have another you know, another bit of administration and, you know, all that
Yeah.
kind of thing on it. And I don't know that it's that sort of, but people don't know. I mean, when they're in it's a communication issue, isn't it? People don't know that they can do that unless they are part of the sector.
Yeah, and of course I think it feels, restricted fund feels to people like, oh, you just want my money. Do you know what I mean? That's if you're a big charity, you're just trying to, it's almost just like a legacy, isn't it? And we'll go and do something. So it's like, how do you give people some, what are the mechanisms that would give people some control of that? She felt that they were an active
well
part.
Maybe it's just understanding what a restricted fund is. I mean, that's because what you're saying is like, people think, well, the charity can do anything what they want with it, but restriction is actually putting that on it. But yeah, it's a tricky one. I get what you're saying, and I've seen so many of these little, you know, doing things that are just replicating time, money, administrative resources.
And some of them become great things. You know, there's a trust called Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust, set up by a gentleman whose wife died of cervical cancer, I think 25-30 years ago, when the care she got was really, really poor. And that's a national charity now, you know, and it's the only one dedicated around cervical cancer. There was clearly a gap around that. So, you know, it's not all a disaster. I just think it's a thought for the sector, really. You know, we need to meet that challenge.
I mean, it's probably a bit, sorry, I didn't raise my hands, but it's probably another discussion, which is that at the moment there's an appetite for lots of people wanting to start up charities and kicks and whatever, but they haven't even looked at how it works, you know, their long-term solvency and stuff like this. And so the hosting, I think there are other ways of doing things to avoid people creating charities that would just not survive in this current climate for the foreseeable future. But it's hosting, and we've done it at Russia Green, hosting other things under your wings, as long as your charity objects allow you to do it. But so you're facilitating other things, other groups, other people, and you save them a lot of hassle of setting up something that's just headache, you know. So yeah, so I think that the sector really has to ask itself questions at the moment about whether and some of it needs to close, literally, because it's probably the better way forward. So there's there's a range of choices, and we need to have honest conversations, you know.
Yeah, and I think the coming year, I mean, this time last year, I was thinking, oh my God, this year's going to be awful. But I actually think for charities this coming year is tougher. I mean, we were doing a tot up of all the money we've had from the government this year, and we've had a lot of money. I mean, partially because we have a cafe, we get hospitality grants on top of other things. Do you know what I mean? But not so much of that will be around, and I think there'll be a lot of fallout. And I think, I mean, it's a really interesting point, Philippe, about hadn't thought so much about the new charities people want to set up now, you know, and enthusiasm will wane, you know, when we get other things to do in our life. And I noticed that last summer, you know, the amount of new people I had contacting us going, oh, can I come and volunteer at Age Exchange? And we going, well, we're closed, you know, like we've got some opportunities doing other things. And as soon as everything opened, you know, like you're contacting people going, oh, we need volunteers. Everyone's like, well, I'm going out, you know. Some of that will go as people, you know, if they ever get a chance to return to sort of a normality, I think. Some will have been fired up for it and fired up for life, thank goodness. Do you know what I mean? And a whole new cohort of people that see the value of community development and third sector work. But yeah.
I wonder if you could do some sort of pairing. So like, I know that when Val was around, I went to Val to say, I'm really interested in setting up small enterprise, and I wanted to do this. And I wonder if they told me to, one, pare down my ideas, which was really useful. And then secondly, I wonder if they'd said, like, if you can actually join this other charity that's doing similar work, and you will be able to, I don't know, have a position where you can sort of make some decisions or whatever. At that time, I might not have set up my own charity, because I just, at the time you think, oh, I'm the only one who thought of this idea and there's no one else doing this and I need to do it. But maybe in the process of like you know, when Val was teaching us about smaller enterprises, they could have suggested then there's a mechanism that you can join other charities and be useful in that way. That's been another option. I don't know. It was something that I've been thinking about. Like, why did I think, oh, I'm going to just set my own thing up? And I had no idea how to do it. And it's a huge undertaking, and you don't actually understand that until you're deep in it and you've done a year, and then you have to do your accounts and everything else. So
You're
yeah.
too far in at that point, then.
Sorry?
Too far in at that point. You're kind of quite a long way along the process.
Yeah. And then obviously, you know, when I decided to close mine, there's all that feeling of failure and oh my God. But I think that you realize that you still help some people and you can still use your skills that you learned from that in other ways. So I think there's a lot of maybe training and explanations around how you can be helpful in your community without the need of setting up your own things. So now I like to help other charities do whatever they need to do. You know, I think it's been a really steep learning curve for me, and I think that some people can run things and some people can't, and that's kind of fine. That's what comes from,
some nice suggestions there. I think one of the challenges is you sort of don't know what other people are doing, do you? It's really difficult. Like, you've got a great idea, you don't know that somebody else is doing it. It's quite hard, and I'm sure the team at Lewisham Local can, you know, identify with that, but you know, and are trying to deal with it. I don't know if there's anything any of you want to add.
Sam, you look like you wanted to say something.
I was pausing. I didn't know if Philippe was going to say something. Yeah, completely agree. I think the only way is just to network more and become more aware of what other people are doing, and yeah, as a team, if we can proactively suggest others, and we do that, which is great. But there's only so much we know. So yeah, I think back to the last main grants consultation, and I think James Lee said, you know, we don't want to see projects duplicate. You know, if you've got another community garden in your area, we want to know why you're different or how are you working together. And someone stood up and said, "Oh, that's ridiculous. How am I supposed to know what's going on in the community?" And it's hard. Yeah, you know, there's only so much we can know, isn't there?
And I think all of these problems come from the real strength that the sector has about passion and drive and people's ability to get things done. And it's like everything, isn't it? Our strength can just become our weakness.
Yeah.
And our passion for things doesn't always allow us to look objectively at them.
Yeah, and I think that's where we should, as community development workers, offer some challenge, really, because the most amount of good comes from that passion and that drive, doesn't it? But as soon as you set up an organization, you get bogged down with running an organization, and you know, that drive goes. So how can we create better structures to enable people to keep hold of that drive and make a difference without creating a burden, I guess.
Yeah.
Sam, I was just going to say that part of the mapping that we're involved in currently might be able to address that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've spoken to a bunch of people over this year, but there are mixed motivations when someone wants to do something. You know, some people it is very altruistic; they just want to make a difference, be useful. But some do want to change career, you know, and they have longer term vision that they're going to get a wage eventually from, you know, this thing that they're setting up, which is totally fine. You know, most of us here, or most, half maybe, you know, are paid workers at charities. But when that motivation is there, it's difficult to have that conversation. Don't set up a group, you know, join them. And they're like, no, I want to be in control.
Yeah.
So it's hard to get past that, really, as well.
Yeah, but then the other side of that is the passion turns into individuals investing their lives and their money into their thing they're set up, and then they get bogged down with the project and finance and everything else, and it's at their cost. And therefore, these are the questions we have to ask at the beginning when people start a project: is help them to understand what it's going to take, and the risks. You know, in a way, what I'm hearing from you, Rebecca, is that well, obviously you've had a really good experience
Yeah.
merge, and even your you know, maybe you find maybe it's enable you to relax and to distress a little bit, feeling more secure. And I think that's when you look at the charitable sector at the minute and how vulnerable it is, and CEOs and managers under a lot of stress, they've really got to listen to your story and say, well, actually, do I want to carry on carrying such a big burden and the threats and doing SWOT analysis every year? You know? So it's you know, it's a question people have to ask themselves.
I think you're right. It's just that little extra bit of surety. Now I still need to, you know, I still need to balance the book. It's not like a
Sure.
check, and I don't have to worry about those things, and I do worry about them all. But there's just a slight different edge to it in that there's somebody else to talk to about it. You know, you all know in the sector sometimes it's cash flow rather than actual long-term problems. Do you know what I mean? So there's some of that. So I should say actually in that we did, not the year just gone, so in 2019 we did have a £20,000 loan from the partner, because we're a wholly owned subsidiary. You know, you need to do it within a legal framework. So we did have a £20,000 loan to see us over a sort of cash hump thing, which again, had we not been with them, would have been a very difficult period.
Anyone else have any comment or questions for Rebecca? Ooh.
Nice to be able to have a sort of wide range discussion about the sector. Actually, I think the last year's been so operational. How do we get this done in a different way? That's nice to be thinking about.
There's one hand up.
I think he's clapping, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, a clap for Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. Well, I will, since no one else will.
All right. It's been very enjoyable for me. So it's nice to talk about what you do sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I think there's one question actually. I don't know if it's a new hand. Oh, Darren. Oh, Darren is just congratulating, really.
No, he's just saying thank you.
Yeah. Excellent.
I mean, I'm more than happy if anybody wants to contact me to, you know, like discuss specific things. Actually, more than happy to have a conversation with people, or, you know, if there's some paperwork that I can find from what we did and you want to see it, then I'd be happy to share stuff as well.
Can I also add something else? We at Lewisham Local, we've started a nascent trustee development peer group. That's a working title, and what we're going to be doing is looking at topics like this, which are quite critical to the sector, particularly now. And so I will drop the link to the group, to the virtual presence of the group in the chat, and we're going to see if we can both, I suppose, test out what groups want to hear more about, what they want to explore more. I think that Rebecca, I've gotten quite a lot of interest, more than have attended. Many haven't actually been able to attend because of conflicting schedules. So the recording that we're doing here, I've said that we would include that in our LinkedIn group that where the trustees have assembled. So hopefully they'll be able to catch it later on. But I'd be really happy to do something like this again. Perhaps another aspect of the merger, collaboration, partnership discussion. We can talk more about that. but I'll also put in a little, I suppose, a little poll in that same group, just to get an idea of what aspects of collaboration that members want to discuss further. I won't necessarily do it now, but we can do that later. So I'll drop that in the chat, unless anybody else has anything else they want to add. Philippe?
No, just to say thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
And Philippe, we'll see you at 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Rebecca.
Bye.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you soon.